Well, good morning, everyone. It's so good to see everybody here this morning on this chilly morning. I've already walked out just to see if the ice is melting yet, but no, still crunch, crunch. Glad to have everyone here with us. And I'm going to remind everyone to please put yourself on mute. Welcome to the First Parish Church. We are a spiritual community seeking truth and meaning since 1667. My name is Brenda Brianna. My pronouns are her, she. I serve as a member of the Music and Worship Committee. Thank you for being with us this morning. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, or maybe you're returning after an absence, we extend a special welcome to you. We are so glad that you chose to be a part of our worship today. If you would like to connect with First Parish, our congregation, receive our emails, know what our upcoming events and services are, please connect with us on our website, which is firstparishbeverly.org. And please stay with us after the service for a virtual coffee hour and a time of fellowship and conversation. It is a joy for us to be here together in spirit this morning. This is a special time we set aside to nourish our spirits and engage our minds. Again, welcome to First Parish Church.
Thank you all for your patience.
Hello, and let me add my welcome. My name is Reverend Susan Milner, and my pronouns are she and her. It is my honor to serve as the interim minister to First Parish Unitarian Universalist Church in Beverly. Our opening words this morning come from the writing of Barack Obama. Black History Month should not be treated as though it is somehow separate from our collective American history, or somehow just boiled down to a compilation of greatest hits from the March on Washington. It's about the lived, shared experience of all African Americans, high and low, famous and obscure, and how those experiences have shaped and challenged and ultimately strengthened America. It's about taking an unvarnished look at the past so that we can create a better future. It's a reminder of where we as a country have been so that we know where we need to go. Unitarian Universalist are always people who tend to see ourselves on a journey. And certainly when it comes to the history of race in this country, it is a journey, a long journey toward wholeness. But in that spirit of being with others on the journey and reaching out to others, would you please greet one another with a warm First Parish welcome. And I would invite you, if you like, to mute and sing along with the first hymn, When the Spirit Says Do. And the words we're going to use are pray, sing, march, and move.
Now, if you would join with me as we light our chalice, our words. Our Unitarian Universalist churches are dedicated to the proposition that beneath all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity which makes us one and which binds us together. We light this chalice in witness to this unity. And continuing on with our affirmation of faith, love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth and love, and to help one another.
Just to let you know, Roshan, our acting director of religious education, is off on a trip this morning. Black History Month, under that name, officially began in 1976 when President Gerald Ford declared it during America's bicentennial. But as is so often the case, the Black roots of our collective history become invisible. Because in 1926, 50 years earlier, African-American historian Carter G. Woodson had launched Negro History Week in the second week of February. He acted out of frustration, years of frustration at not being able to get the accomplishments of Black Americans recognized in the regular annals of other historians. 50 years later, in 76, it had evolved through a period of Negro History Month and then into Black History Month. This year, now in 2022, as efforts are spreading around our country to prevent and hinder the teaching of history of race in this country, the teaching of the history of slavery and the struggle for civil rights, teaching that in our schools, it is more important than ever for us to tell a whole history and not a partial history. And with our February theme being Widen the Circle, today we are going to recognize 4 little-known Black Americans in 3 stories, Black Americans who are part of our own Unitarian Universalist history. And the first one, it's Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and I have a photograph of her right here behind me, if you can see it. Friday, this past Friday, marked the 109th birthday of Rosa Parks. Her story is a story we all know, refusing to leave the seat in front of the bus, the boycott, the civil rights movement. But over 100 years earlier, another Black woman showed similar courage and conviction. Imagine, it is 1858 and Frances Ellen Watkins sits down on a Philadelphia streetcar, only to have the conductor demand that she leave. The reason, she is Black. She refuses. Another passenger says that she should sit in the corner. She refuses. And when the conductor rejects her fare, she throws it on the floor of the tram. In a country where slavery was still legal in that year, Frances Ellen Watkins believed fiercely in freedom and equality. She was born to free parents in the slaveholding state of Maryland, which must have made her extraordinarily aware of the 2 conflicting worlds. Orphaned at 3, she went to live with a Baltimore aunt and uncle who provided her with a classical education at their own academy for Negro youth. Times were hard, though, and by 14, she had to become a domestic servant. And the only stroke of good luck there, the Quaker family that she worked for owned a bookshop. And the books that she read there fed her soul and her native talent. By age 20, Frances Watkins was a poet. Watkins' history is unusual, but the larger history of what was going on has a way of intersecting with individuals. In her case, it was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. By this time, Watkins was living in rural Pennsylvania, had gone outside of Philadelphia. She was dedicated to teaching Black children. And there she heard about a young, free Black man who, after crossing into Maryland without even realizing, he had crossed the state border, was captured and sold to a Georgia slaveholder because of the Fugitive Slave Act. He soon died in captivity, and that tragic story stirred all of her passion for freedom. Watkins wrote to a friend, "I pledged myself to the anti-slavery cause." She moved back to Philadelphia, found a Black community, and joined the Vigilance Committee, which had formed to help slaves make their escape on the Underground Railroad. And after working with that organization and hearing the stories of pain and suffering from her people, the people she met there, Watkins turned her own talents to lecturing in support of abolition. She also became active in the abolitionist efforts of the Baltimore Unitarian congregation. She became a member. Soon she was a paid full-time lecturer for the State Anti-Slavery Society of Maine. And when she was doing these lectures, she riveted audiences. In New England, female speakers weren't really approved of, but the large crowds came anyway. And one of the things they did was to buy her book of poetry. She donated most of the income from those sales to anti-slavery causes. And when one male leader urged her to keep more of the proceeds from the books for herself, she wrote back, "Let me explain a few matters to you. In the first place, I am able to give something. And in the second place, I am willing to do so." Frances Watkins was glad in her heart and soul to be an activist. "Is it not a privilege," she wrote to a friend. Please mute everybody. "Is it not a privilege," she wrote to a friend, "if you are sisterless and lonely, to be a sister to the human race and to place your heart where it." You can't mute me, Jenna. Where it may throb close to the downtrodden of humanity. In 1864, her husband of 4 years, Fenton Harper, died, and Ellen was left with a young daughter to support, Frances Ellen. And so she took to the lecture circuit again, and this time, remember, it's 1864, she was advocating for the Union to allow Black troops to fight on its side. For the rest of her life, she advocated for reform, education, and equality. She believed deeply that her efforts could contribute to a better world, writing that she hoped her life might gladden the earth. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. As people of faith, together we hold these experiences and feelings in the light, honoring their place in our collective life and our individual lives, and extending our support and love to one another. Let us enter into the silence. May our hopes and dreams take flight on the wings of love. Our second story today is about Ethelred Brown. And Mr. Brown is back here in this photo. You know, when we usually learn about the beginnings of Unitarianism in this country, American Unitarianism, the story is very white. The well-known struggles of faith seem to have occurred among white men and a few white women in New England. But when the stories of Black Unitarians and other Unitarians of color remain invisible, we miss how much they have contributed to the texture and history of people of this faith, to the stories of courage and witness, and to the obstacles that were put in their way, sometimes by the very church itself. The story of Ethelred Brown makes our history more whole. Brown grew up in Jamaica, a child with so much mathematical ability that he became an accountant. He was good at his profession, but in the long run, math became a frame for his deeper questions. As he sat in church and listened to preachers speak about the Trinity, three gods being one, to him, the numbers didn't add up. And then one day he found a pamphlet lying on a table in his uncle's house. And among the other interesting words in it, a single declaration stood out to him. The Lord our God is one God. These words of William Ellery Channing, a founder of American Unitarianism, rang deeply true to Brown and spurred him to research a religion that he knew nothing about. Before long, he concluded that he was Unitarian, even if there was not a church for him to join in Jamaica, even if he had to make his own way in part of this faith. And so at the age of 32, he had a change of profession. He decided that he needed to become a Unitarian minister. He found out he would have to go to the States to study for it. So he saved his money, bade farewell to his wife and children, and set sail for America. But nothing was going to come easily. The US denied him entry because of incorrect paperwork, and his only course was to return to Jamaica, save more money, come again to America, and study. In 1912, Brown became the first Black person ordained to the Unitarian ministry. And keep in mind, this was 87 years after the founding of the Unitarian Association of America. The challenge then for him was how to serve this faith. No white congregation would call a Black minister, and there were no Black congregations. And so again, Ethelred Brown had to make his own way. He boarded a ship for Jamaica, and there, in his home country, he started a Unitarian congregation himself. Now, maybe he was a restless soul because 8 years later, he decided he would found another congregation, this time in the United States. And this transition would be his last. He and his family settled in New York City, where he started the Harlem Community Church in 1920. As you can imagine, the path did not come easily. The congregation received little support from the greater Unitarian world, and Brown's own family endured many hardships. But he served as minister to the Harlem Community Church for 35 years. Besides honoring Ethelred Brown today, we recognize that because of him, hundreds of people in Harlem who otherwise might never have known liberal religious faith gathered in his community. He made a way for them too. I'm glad that today in our Unitarian Universalist world and association, we do more to support our Black ministers and Black members, especially in this month of February, standing on the side of love. But also, of course, we want to support spreading the values that honor a whole history in our individual congregations. We appreciate all the ways you support First Parish, in the time you give, in the commitment, in the love you open your hearts to, and yes, in your sharing of resources. So please remember to donate, to pay your pledges, send them to the church. And we always receive your gifts gratefully. Our third story is about a couple, Ellen and William Craft. This story is so dramatic that I can easily imagine it as a movie. Ellen and William Craft made one of the most daring escapes from slavery that has been documented. The Crafts lived in Macon, Georgia, under the ownership of different white men, and they longed to be together and to be free. When the moment for escape came, consider what they were carrying in their hearts, in their minds, in their history. At 16, William had been sold at auction just minutes after seeing his 14-year-old brother sold. His parents and other siblings experienced the same fate at different places across the South. Now, William was a skilled cabinet maker, and he continued his trade, but nearly everything he earned went into the pocket of the man who had bought him. William came up with a plan to escape, but its execution depended on Ellen Craft's skill and courage. Ellen was light-skinned enough to pass for white, and so she disguised her race, her gender, and her social status by posing as an ill Southern gentleman on his way to Philadelphia for medical treatment. She donned men's trousers and coat. She cut her hair. She put on glasses, and she wrapped her face in bandages. The much darker William presented himself as the master's devoted slave. On December 21st, 1848, now ready for the journey, the Crafts knelt in prayer and, in Ellen's words, took a desperate leap for liberty, a desperate leap for liberty. They boarded the train in Macon with tickets to Savannah. But even before the train left the station, they had their first close call. The cabinet maker for whom William worked jumped onto the train searching for his worker who had disappeared, obviously. He looked right through. He came into Ellen's car, looked right through it, but glanced past the invalid gentleman. Just before he could reach the car for Black travelers, where William sat, the train blew the whistle for departure and he had to get off. It was one of only many close calls the couple had traveling by train and boat up the eastern coast of South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland. By Christmas, they arrived in Philadelphia, and in their memoir, their narrative about their escape, running 1,000 miles for freedom, they wrote that courage, quick thinking, luck, and our Heavenly Father had sustained them. The religious reference is interesting for their next chapter. In Philadelphia, a Quaker family provided them with a place to stay for 3 weeks before they made their way to Boston to live. In this northern capital, of which we're in the greater area, William again became a cabinet maker and Ellen a seamstress. They lived in the boarding house of Lewis Hayden, a free Black man who used his home as a place where many fugitive slaves found their way on their trip through the Underground Railroad. During this time, the Crafts became members of the Unitarian congregation served by the well-known preacher and abolitionist Theodore Parker, author of the now famous declaration, "The moral arc of the universe is long and bends toward justice." Again, crisis, though, intervened in their lives. In 1850, Congress passed the dreaded Fugitive Slave Act, which I mentioned before, making even Boston unsafe for the Crafts. Because now, not only did the law allow the return of escaped slaves to their owners, but it also required Northern citizens to aid in their capture. Immediately, Boston abolitionists took up resistance, with Theodore Parker becoming one of the founders of the Vigilance Committee I mentioned before to protect the rights of Black Bostonians. William Craft joined and became a member. A month later, the Crafts' former owners from Georgia sent 2 agents to Boston to capture them. Working together, the abolitionist community, Unitarians, and the African American community threw up every obstacle they could to the agents and kept them away from the Crafts and others for a month. Finally, the agents gave up and returned to Georgia, but the call had been too close and the future was too uncertain. And so the Crafts quickly sailed for England, where they could be free. Back here, Theodore Parker, the Reverend Theodore Parker, wrote an angry letter to President Millard Fillmore, who was also Unitarian. He laid out the Crafts story and dared Fillmore to enforce this horrible, inhumane law. Parker stated that he himself would obey the laws of God, even if it meant breaking the laws of men. Fillmore opposed slavery too, at least theoretically, but in bitter irony, he decided to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act in the hope of keeping the Union together. The Crafts made a home in England, and they had 5 children. But 20 years later, when the nation was taped back together after the Civil War, they brought their family back to the United States, and they established a school for the education of Black children in Georgia. It had been a long journey, and life would never be easy, but we hope they had finally come home. I invite you, with your sound muted, to join in singing "I'm on My Way."
And now, as we extinguish our chalice, please join with me in the words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
So before I say the words for the benediction, I want to just pull these up here and show you. I think this is such Frances Ellen Watkins Harper's eyes are just so remarkably deep, but I just think we ought to. Can you see? I hope you're seeing. I think we ought to just, in a moment of silence, let these vision of these Black Unitarian from history imprint on our mind and let them become part of us. And likewise with Ethelred Brown. And my photo of the Crafts may be a bit harder to see. Poet Audre Lorde wrote, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, that it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid." May we all have the vision and the courage to tell a whole history so that all children may have a whole future and all of us may live more whole lives. Amen. Blessed be.